Welcome, one and all, to the ancient journey. If you like the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to us. Today's journey, Russell Douglas. He had hoped that people wouldn't get the wrong idea, but he had to admit that from the outside this looked a little suspicious. Russell Douglas sat in his yellow Chevy Tracker and waited. Peggy had a surprise for Russell's estranged wife, Brenna. Waiting in such a secluded spot seemed unusual, almost like sneaking around, but Peggy worked for Brenna, and Russell wondered when she would arrive. It was the day after Christmas, 2003. Here he was, parked in a secluded area of Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound. Where is she, he thought. He wouldn't have to wonder for long. As soon, Russell Douglas was dead. Peggy Sue Thomas was tall, and she was tough, and she was beautiful. Peggy was a former Miss Washington who participated in the U.S. Continental Beauty Pageant at the age of 34. The pretty beautician had been, of all things, a Navy mechanic before working as a stylist in a beauty salon owned by Russell's wife, Brenna. Brenna and Russell had been married in 1994, but were separated, with Russell living miles away in Renton, Washington. Russell worked for a consulting firm while Brenna ran her salon. Like any good friend, Peggy was Brenna's confidant. It wasn't long before they knew quite a bit about each other, and there was quite a bit to know, according to Peggy. Brenna had confided to Peggy that her husband, Russell, was abusive, and soon after, Russell was dead, shot between the eyes as he sat in his car. Police didn't take long to identify Russell's body. The only thing that they were sure of was that he did not commit suicide. There was no gun in or near Russell's car. In fact, it would be 10 long years before the case is solved. Police traveled to Brenna's home to break the bad news to her, but are surprised when she seems less than surprised, and that she even takes the time to insult Russell a few times to the police. Detectives found the reaction of the new widow to be less than normal and began to formulate ideas that perhaps Brenna was involved in some way. After some digging, though, they could find no evidence to indicate she was involved, so they started to run a fine-tooth comb through Russell's life. Detectives would have quite a few questions for someone who popped up in Russell's phone records, one Peggy Sue Thomas. Peggy turned on the charm and answered each one of the detectives' questions. Sure, she was friends with Brenna, but certainly knew nothing of the murder of Russell. Months went by, and the police were coming up empty, until an anonymous tip reached the police over the phone lines. A caller told investigators he knew who killed Russell Douglas. He was good friends with the murderer. In fact, they were in a band together, and the murderer was quite a musician. Jim Huden lived in Punta Gorda, Florida, and had a wife, Jean, but Jim, just like his music, is complicated. Jim happens to have a girlfriend, and Jim's girlfriend happens to be one Peggy Sue Thomas. Bill Hill turned out to be the anonymous caller, another Florida resident, and he had quite a story to tell. Jim Huden had a big mouth, and he told a big tale of being a trigger man for an insurance payout killing of Russell. And Peggy and a friend, Brenna, were in on the plan. Police interrogated Jim and Peggy, but again came up empty. There was nothing to tie them to the murder directly, nothing to hold them with, and they had to let them go. But shortly after his questioning, Jim skipped town and ended up in sunny Veracruz, Mexico. He played for a few bands down there and even went by a nickname, Maestro Jim. No one knew he had left a wife and a girlfriend behind him and gone into hiding. He remained a fugitive in Mexico for 6 years. Peggy Sue went on living her life and moved to Las Vegas and drove limos around for high-stakes gamblers in the area. And Peggy, still quite attractive, married several times and seemed to hit the virtual lottery when she met Mark Allen, the thoroughbred horse-owning millionaire. After a short marriage and a quick divorce, Peggy Sue took her earnings from that divorce settlement and moved back to Whidbey Island. What about Brenna Douglas? How is she faring now, this widow with 2 small children? Well, Brenna would have been doing better had it not been for her insurance claims for Russel being denied. In fact, Brenna would be in court trying to wrangle settlements from both AIG and Farmers Insurance for her husband's death. AIG refused to pay out the $200,000 insurance policy at first because Russell's employer apparently had not been keeping up on their premiums. But it didn't take long until AIG investigated the case of Russell's murder and would refuse to pay out due to Brenna's possible involvement in the case. AIG offered to put the money in a trust for her children, but Brenna refused. 2 insurance policies would have netted Brenna nearly $500,000 if paid out together, but it appears as though to date Brenna has not collected all of this money. But while Brenna was having problems collecting money, police were having great luck collecting breaks in the case. First, a former law enforcement officer had revealed that he owned a Bersa 380, the handgun that fit the description of the caliber of weapon police were searching for, and it was given to him by, you guessed it, Jim Huden. Another man came forward and told police that he had shown Maestro Jim how to clean, disassemble, and fire the Bersa. In fact, he had even shown the Maestro how to make a silencer for the weapon. The firearm matched the one that killed Russell, but the breaks kept coming as a tip came in that revealed the whereabouts of Huden, and the Mexican police arrested him. The U.S. Marshal Service was quick to scoop up the Maestro and return him to the U.S. to face justice. Jim went to trial in 2012, and remember Jim's wife, Jean? Well, not to be forgotten, she also testified that Jim and Peggy Sue had confessed to their roles in the murder. Other friends of Jim testified to the same thing. Jim never took the stand, never implicated Peggy. For once it appeared that Jim had nothing to say. Jim was found guilty in 2012 of first-degree murder and sentenced to 80 years. Peggy was picked up in New Mexico and arrested. Pretty Peggy Sue pled guilty to a charge of rendering criminal assistance. She was sentenced to only 4 years behind bars. She claims innocence to this day. Brenna Douglas has never been charged. Prosecutors have stated that she was always on their radar, but Brenna never faced justice. Thanks for watching, and thanks for sharing the journey.